Okay, final question here. This comes from Matt. He says, my wife would like to ask how one can set boundaries in a codependent parent-child relationship while honoring one's parent, according to the fifth commandment, particularly when that parent takes offense to the adult child respectfully setting boundaries.
Yeah. I just said, I was telling someone the other day, how people respond to your boundaries doesn't determine the reasonableness of your boundaries. Like, just because somebody reacts poorly doesn't mean it's not a good boundary. Just because somebody reacts poorly doesn't mean it's not a reasonable boundary. It doesn't mean it's not a healthy boundary. Sometimes you lay down a healthy boundary and an unhealthy person is going to have an unhealthy reaction to a healthy boundary. And oftentimes that is common. If somebody isn't healthy or they're emotionally immature, they're going to react poorly to a healthy boundary. I put this on Instagram the other day. I've recently forayed into Instagram. And someone didn't like that. This woman responded. And this woman was a parent. And she actually was a parent who didn't like, gosh, it'd be amazing if that was the mom to this person. She didn't like that I said boundaries were sometimes important. She said it doesn't seem very Christian to set boundaries. And oftentimes we think of boundaries as like being in conflict, conflictual. And they're not. I mean, I think.
Or even obstacles to a relationship.
Right.
They're not even a thing you put in the middle of us. It's something, you'd say this better, but it's something you set up in order to perhaps have a more healthy relationship.
Not 100%, dude. So, like, Christ had boundaries, right? So, you know what we don't see in the Gospels? When he goes, it's like he detaches from the crowds and he went up to a mountain to pray alone. And that's interesting. Like, obviously, at some point, his disciples are probably trying to follow him, and he's like, hey guys, I'm going to go by myself. It's not just like they just like stop following for some reason. I mean, they follow him everywhere. And yet we have these moments where he deliberately goes away alone, or where he leaves the crowds and goes off. Imagine people.
That's what I tell my wife when I leave parties without saying goodbye. I'm just doing what Jesus would do.
There are times when Christ seems to set a boundary. And it's not because he's in conflict. It's because boundaries allow us to function and thrive and flourish. They're just limits to what behaviors we're willing to accept from people. That's all it is. I mean, it's a limit to what behavior I'm willing to accept. Now, I'll say this. Sometimes it would be perfectly healthy and acceptable to set a boundary. But because you might have a certain spiritual maturity or wisdom or perspective, you're actually willing to suffer a little more of somebody else's immaturity or problematic behavior in service of the relationship, or maybe you're willing to suffer it a little more because you want to let your kids hang out with their grandparents. So you put up with a little something that normally you feel like you wouldn't, but from a place of, now it has to be done from a place of wisdom and maturity and like charity, not from a place of fear or resentment. And so I think there are times when it would be healthy to draw a boundary that you could choose not to. Even though it would be well within your purview, you could choose not to. But how do you do it? I think you do it in stages. I think you start off with like a minimal boundary, the lowest possible boundary or the least restrictive boundary that will allow you to achieve the thing you need. And then I think if that's not respected, you can move up. And I think it should start gentle and peaceful, and it shouldn't be a big deal. It should just be, hey, here's what we're going to do. And then it can also escalate in forcefulness if it's not respected. Hey, I really need you to pay attention and listen to this thing. And then sometimes it can also be helpful to have a spouse get involved. I think initially allowing the child of the parent to be the one to set the boundary first is helpful. But then if you need some backup and support as you're escalating the boundary, if it's not respected, you can bring your spouse in with you to have a conversation together with the parents. But I think the word that keeps coming up, man, is freedom for me. Like, to do it with freedom, in the sense that I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm not setting a boundary to hurt you. That's not my goal. And if that is your goal, then you need to reexamine why you're setting boundaries and what the purpose of boundaries is. It's never to hurt another person. And I try to communicate that if I have to set a boundary. I'm not doing this because I want to hurt you, because I don't like you, I'm doing this because I think it's what's going to be best ultimately for both of us. And somebody can disagree with that. Well, I don't think that's true. Okay. But where I am right now and the way I'm thinking about it, that is true for me. And so I'm going to need you to respect that. Mm-hmm. And if you can't, then the boundary then we might need to leave, or we might need
to flesh this thought out. How might setting boundaries with your parents be an example of honoring them?
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily a contradiction of that commandment. It could in fact be.
Sometimes I'm better able to show love, patience, tolerance, respect when I'm taking care of myself, and when I'm not allowing unhealthy or unhelpful behavior into our relationship, behavior that makes me angry, resentful, that trounces on my autonomy. It gets weird when you become an adult, because we're called to respect and honor our parents, but that certainly doesn't mean that we still have to listen to everything they say. I am an adult man who has children, and sometimes what my parents might recommend, hypothetically, I mean, it's within the realm of possibility that what my parents think is best for my family, I don't think is best for my family. Mm-hmm. It would be weird to say, well, you always have to honor. What I can say, honor my parents in that case, I think means something like, I'm willing to hear what you have to say. Oh, okay, thanks. But it doesn't mean I have to agree with it or do it. Well, I think you should let your mother buy your daughter her first Easter dress. Well, my wife wants to buy our daughter the first Easter dress. This is a real scenario that a friend of mine went through. Her mother-in-law wanted to buy the first Easter dress, but she wanted to buy her daughter her first Easter dress, and they had different tastes. And her husband, my buddy, had to drop out and say, Mom, and here's how I think you honor her. I really appreciate that you want to buy so-and-so a dress, but my wife would like to do it. It's our first, we're so excited. And mother-in-law's feelings were a little bit hurt, because she had done that for all the other grandchildren with all the other siblings, but it's okay. I think the honoring is, here's how I think we honor our parents as we get older and we have legitimate and normal disagreements on how to live and what to do and how to parent. I think the way we honor them is by never acting out of spite or resentment or an intentional desire to hurt.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe or you're a dingus. What's a dingus exactly?
Used to refer to something one cannot or does not wish to name specifically.
You don't have to subscribe, but if you did, I'd love it. You dingus.
Like the video. That's who we're using that one. Take one.